Welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge, and we're going to continue our series of podcasts on the subject of intuition. Last week's podcast was on defining intuition as we use it in the personality psychology tools that we are familiar with, in particular with Myers-Briggs, which borrows from the work of Carl Jung. And we defined intuition as effectively advanced pattern recognition.
Yeah.
It's a learning style where people feel comfortable asking the question, what if? They feel comfortable basically speculating and being willing to, follow the train of thought of what's going on behind the curtain.
Feel free to listen to this podcast and get from it what we're going to talk about. But if you haven't listened to the last one, it might make more sense to go back and do that because it's going to give a lot of context for what we're going to talk about today. Yeah,
we're going to be building on the previous podcast. And next week we'll continue on with this series on intuition because we really want to address a segment of the population that we have a feeling is kind of ignored. And we went down that rabbit hole a bit in the last podcast, that there's a segment of the population, about 25%, that use intuition as their primary way of learning and understanding the world. And because they're only 25% of the population, even though it's 1 in 4, they're definitely not the majority, and so the world is not designed for them. And so what we wanted to do in this podcast is talk a little bit about the two styles of intuition that people use, the two specific learning styles of intuition. Because if you look at intuition, it actually gets broken down into two modalities. And which modality you're using changes the flavor of that intuition substantially.
I want to just stop here for 1 second and tell a story. I know we want to get into the actual data, but when we talk about the segment of the population that's represented as intuitive learning style, like we talked about on the last episode of our podcast, 25% of us are intuitive learning style and 75% of us use a sensory learning style, of the population.
And just to add some context there, the sensory learning style are people who aren't as comfortable speculating.
Correct.
They are far more reliant on things being verifiable, observable. They want information to be more safe or secure, verifiable, reliable. And it's intuitives that are willing to take that leap, sort of that pattern recognition leap and basically go, I think I know what's going on here, even if they don't have like completely verifiable information on it. So
I was kind of in a discussion with someone I grew up with recently.
A kerfuffle.
A discussion. It was just kind of there were some misunderstandings. There were some, you go through life and you always have a little bit of conflict that comes up. Anyway, I was in this conflict with this person, and he said to me, listen, one of the things that's so frustrating about you, Joel, is you show up when you're hanging out with me and some other people that you know, and you can't just sit down and talk about normal stuff. You can't just sit down and talk about your job, talk about the family, talk about the weather, talk about sports. You got to talk about weird stuff. You got to talk about things that are just like, they don't make any sense. He didn't use the word speculative, but basically he was trying to say it's speculative type stuff that it's not reliable. And he got to the point where he's trying to express this to me. And I'm like, well, I guess it's just stuff I'm interested in. He says, what? Listen, why can't you just be normal? Why are you so weird?
Why are you so weird?
And I said, I guess I'm wired differently. I'm a weird person. I like weird things. I'm into weird stuff. And he wasn't at the level where I could explain to him about intuition. But if I was able to, I'd let him know that, look, this is how my brain learns information. I do use my 5 senses. I do absorb the real world around me, but I also make leaps in logic. All of us people that use intuition will make speculative leaps. We want to look behind the curtain and see kind of the patterns and what's happening.
What's fascinating about that is that it wasn't just baffling to him, it was frustrating to him.
He was actually angry about it.
Right.
He was actually angry that I couldn't be normal, or in his definition, normal. Just talk about normal stuff. I show up and I'm saying weird stuff, and it's like it's distasteful and it's difficult. And he and I we get along obviously and stuff like that. But this was a frustration for him, showing up
Right.
to different events and functions where he's at, and I can't just be a normal person.
Right. And what's so fascinating about that, or not what's fascinating, what might even actually be called tragic about that, is for people who are listening to these podcasts and identify with what we've been talking about with intuition.
Yeah.
This might not be an isolated event for intuitives. Like, they might actually have people in their lives, family members, friends, like, I don't know, teachers, people who have influenced them, people they're influencing, who are actually upset because the intuitive person is wired different. And this other person can't understand that. They can't relate to it. They can't, and everybody else seems to be on the side of perhaps, the censor. So why does this intuitive have to be so weird? I actually know of an intuitive whose parents took him to a psychologist and they said, fix this kid. He needs to be fixed. And the psychologist was an intuitive themselves. And after a bit of time, they looked at the parents and went, there's nothing really wrong with the kid. The kid is just, basically the psychologist was trying to explain the kid is wired different. And the kid's grandfather, who was also there, stood up and said, this kid is broken and you need to fix him. And I find it so kind of horrifying that we don't have enough information in our public consciousness to be able to explain away why somebody, your child, a friend, a family member, might be seeing the world profoundly differently than you are, and that doesn't mean they're broken.
Yeah.
So I think a big part of what we do at Personality Hacker, a big part of our personal mission, is to not, our first stated mission is to give everybody permission to be themselves. But the second part is we really love to get into the public consciousness, this idea that there are different learning styles, there's different modalities of interacting with the world. And we don't have to be an expert, we don't have to be a master of all this information. We just have to hold space for the idea that there might be some differences, like profound differences, the kind where you don't really understand where the person's coming from. You don't get it.
Yeah.
This, where you're like, hey, why can't you just talk about sports and your job, right? There's a little bit of room there for the person to say, look, I don't get how you're thinking. I don't get why you think the way that you do. But I bet you're one of those intuitives that I've heard so little about or so much about, right? Like, just to be able to open up some space. So one of the things we want to do in this series of podcasts is explain the different styles of intuition, just to give some context for how it works, how it looks in different people, and even amongst intuitives to understand that there's actually, it's not just being intuitive, that there's different styles and different approaches to intuition. So if you run into somebody else who you think is intuitive, but they're going about it really differently than you are, it's because they are probably going about it differently than you are. And we wanted to give a little context to that.
And just remember, and we mentioned this last time, everyone has intuition as part of their learning process. In other words, everyone uses intuition to some degree.
Yeah, everybody can access it.
Exactly. But what we're talking about are people that use this as a primary, a preferenced way of learning in the world. So these are people that are using this as their primary way of learning. And everyone has access to this, but obviously people that use this as their primary way and have a preference for this are going to be better at it because they're using it more often. And so we call those people intuitives. It's not that not everyone can access intuition. It's just that these are the people that are accessing it as a preference on a regular basis. And that's why we call them intuitives. It's like a name we've given it, but that's why. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Just like with any muscle, the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. And intuition is like a mental muscle. It does the same thing.
So let's get into breaking down the two types of intuition.
Okay, so this is going to get a little data heavy, but effectively, what we're talking about with intuition goes back to the Myers-Briggs system, and then the Myers-Briggs system harkens back to the work of Carl Jung. And intuition, like we've been talking about, is a learning style. It's a way of understanding reality, taking in new information, trying to figure out the world around you. And the reason why we want to describe it as a learning style is we want to contrast that with, say, a decision-making style or mental process. Because decision-making evaluates information. It makes judgment calls. When it gets a piece of information in, it goes, what am I supposed to do with this, right? Like, what is the action I should be taking, or how should I be thinking about it? A learning style doesn't do that. It's more open. It's more about just trying to figure out how things work. And so intuition isn't judgmental. It's not making final calls. It's not deciding the value of something. It's just really trying to get it. It's trying to understand it. Now, if you're an intuitive, which means that you lead with a learning style of one of the styles of intuition, which we're about to talk about, and you feel like you do make judgment calls based on information, it's because you also have mental processes that are making judgment calls, right? Are evaluating and decision making. And all of these mental processes are so grafted together, they're all sort of intertwined, that they sometimes feel like the same thing. And that's why it's not entirely accurate to describe them as if they're in a vacuum, because all these mental processes that we use are kind of all blended together, and they work in such synchronicity that it's hard to figure out where one starts and the other stops. But that said, we're going to pretend like intuition is in a vacuum, and we're just going to describe these two styles of intuition as if nothing else influences them. But inside you, your intuition is working in conjunction with your mind's ability to evaluate the information it takes in. All by itself, though, intuition is totally non-judgmental. It's just a way to learn. So the two styles of intuition are pretty easy to figure out. One goes inward. It's called introverted intuition. And the other style of intuition is outwardly focused. It's called extroverted intuition. And then if you go to our website, we have a system that we call the Genius Style system or assessment, and it's built largely on the Myers-Briggs system. And so what we've done is, in order to make this more easy to understand or more accessible, we've given each of these styles of intuition a nickname that we feel really encapsulates what the learning process does. And so from this point on, we're going to refer to these styles of intuition by their nicknames. Yeah. So the introverted intuitive style, we've given that nickname perspectives. And the reason why we gave it the nickname of perspectives is that's effectively what it does. It, on some level, is not married to its own perspective. So when people are using this perspectives process, they're a little divorced from their own perspective. That gives them the ability to watch their own mind form patterns. It's a very interesting ability. If you're watching your mind form patterns, eventually over time, you're going to get the pattern of the patterns. You're going to kind of understand how brains or minds form patterns at all, right? Like you're just going to kind of get that. So perspectives people, when they hear other people talk or take an action or do something, their mind will sort of shift out of their own perspective and shift into the other person's perspective and get a sense of what's going on with this other person. And so what they end up being able to do feels like mind reading. It feels like, because they get a little sense of what's going on for the other person. And as soon as they get that sense, they go, I bet this is the pattern that's been created in the other person's unconscious mind. I bet this is what they're thinking. And so a lot of times perspectives users will have a conversation with somebody and they'll basically tell this other person what happened in their life or what they're thinking or their experience in a way that really weirds the other person out because it feels like this person just read their mind.
Yeah, we were actually at dinner last night with a friend of ours, Melanie, and she uses this perspectives process as a learning process. And we were talking about a third party and kind of a situation, and she basically said, I think this is probably what's going on for this person. And it was almost like she had shifted into their mind. And I was sitting there thinking, I think you might be right. I hadn't thought of it this way. And she gave me this perspective of what this person's probably experiencing and what they're thinking or feeling in the experience. I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Of course they would feel that in that situation, whatever the situation was we were talking about. Yeah, I can see totally what you're saying. And she was able to do that just like, boom. Like it was part of her genius. Like she can just perspective so easily because this is a talent of hers. This is a preference of hers.
Yeah, it feels very instinctive. And
it felt weird. It felt like she was like, wow, how did you do that? Like it feels like magic almost.
Yeah, well, and perspectives users oftentimes don't reveal this form of genius. And the reason why is because it can weird other people out. Like they'll think you have ESP, or they'll think that you've been reading their private diary or whatever. And so oftentimes the person will look at the perspectives user and go, how did you know that? And the problem is that because perspectives is working so unconsciously, the perspectives user will say, I don't know how I know that, I just know. The other thing that perspectives does is it gives the person who's using it the ability to forecast way into the future. They're very good at understanding implications and understanding where something's headed. They almost have the ability to truly predict future events. So this might feel woo-woo to anybody who's using perspectives. You know exactly what we're talking about, and it doesn't feel woo-woo. It just feels like it's happening to you. And I know a lot of people who are, quite skeptical, who are not into woo-woo stuff at all, who use perspectives. And they just see it as prediction ability. They just see it as the ability to forecast into the future. A lot of the great sci-fi writers of the past have been perspectives users because they're able to kind of see how things are going to pan out. And so they've been able to say, well, this is the kind of technology we're going to be using in the future. I always think of like Star Trek, where they were carrying around these like sort of little flat, it looked like clipboards, and like touching the clipboards in order to access information like that was a computer.
Exactly.
Like back in the early 90s, remember that?
Yeah.
And like right now, that is technology we're all commonly using, right? We're using touchscreen pads on, our tablets, and that's just every day. I mean, we take it for granted, and it's been like, 5 years since we started using that technology? And yet, whoever thought that piece up in the Gene Roddenberry, world of Star Trek, whoever was the person who decided that that was something that people in the future would be using, was totally spot on. That's what we use. We use tablets that have touchscreen. So it's kind of that ability. It's the ability to see what's coming down the pike. It's the ability to kind of forecast into the future what's gonna be happening.
Yeah. Well, and I think that we can see this also. Perspectives people are able to see large groups of people and how social movements will happen as well. So, I can see this technology now, like an iPad, how people are using this. It's probably going to cause this chain reaction and a culture shift in this way. And you're like, what? And then sure enough, a couple years from there, boom, this happens. A culture shift happens. And they were right because they can kind of see how people are going to thinking about what they're thinking about.
Right.
It's like this weird level thing. Yeah. Now, neither one of us have perspectives.
I was just about to say that.
Intuition. So it is like magic to both of us too, because we don't use this process primarily as our learning style. No,
we're both intuitives, but we're not perspectives users. So whenever I get around a perspectives person, I'm just like, are you a wizard? Because it feels like it feels like an incredible ability.
Yeah.
Now, one more thing I want to mention about perspectives users is that because they're able to understand how minds form patterns, one thing they have an instinctive grasp on is that the picture in my head when somebody says a word is different than the picture in your head. Now, the reason why this is unusual is that most people don't even realize they're doing this, but they assume that when you use a word, the exact same picture is showing up in your head as it is in mine. And that's not reality. Let's use a really concrete example. Let's use the word teacup, okay? When I say the word teacup and you have a picture that comes up in your head, it is not the same picture that's coming up in my head, right? Like, I'm thinking of a different teacup than you are. You might be thinking of the first teacup you ever saw, or one that you thought was particularly beautiful, or a conglomeration of all the teacups you've ever seen.
I'm thinking of Piper's little plastic teacups right now. That she
right, right. And I'm thinking of a delicate, beautiful China porcelain teacup that I saw recently. So we just have different images in our head. Now, it's really interesting, but if you really think about it, most people don't even question that. When I say teacup, same picture's happening for both of us. Now, when it comes to something concrete like an object, like a teacup, because the object is so concrete, generally, whatever it is, it's like a small bowl that holds, hot, strained tea, water, right? Like basically teacup, we can both agree on that. And whatever picture's coming up for us is probably that. Like its functionality is coming up for both of us. So we don't even think about, I don't have to describe the one that's in my head when I use the word just to make sure that we're on the same page. However, when we start using really abstract words like loyalty or love or integrity or fastidiousness, like anything that's an abstract word that doesn't have an immediate concrete association, now the two pictures in our head become very important because we might not actually be seeing the same image at all. And a lot of arguments are based on two people using the same word that have two totally different meanings for that word. And a perspectives person, because they understand how people think and they recognize how patterns form in others' minds, are first of all, they're masters of metaphor. And second of all, they're usually pretty good at conflict resolution because they'll be seeing two people in an argument and they'll go, whoa, guys, I think you guys are using two different words to say the same thing. You actually agree. Or they'll say, I actually think that you guys are using the same words for two different pictures. Right? Like, this is actually what's going on. And other people will look at them and go, whoa, how did you figure that out? It's part of the gift. It's part of the perspective's gift to be able to understand that different pictures come up in different people's minds for different words.
Yeah, and it's the true power of how perspectives can facilitate reconciliation or understanding between parties and all these different types of things. A couple other things to mention about perspectives that I've noticed is perspectives, the process of learning with perspectives is it first of all takes, I believe, from my perspective, it takes a little bit of time sometimes. It takes some time to develop. Often, like we have a mutual friend who has a perspectives learning style, and oftentimes you'll feed him a problem, and that problem will sit and bang around his unconscious for several days, and then he'll come out and say, hey, I got the answer to the problem you gave me. And it's a brilliant answer, but it took a while to go through the process of getting to, like, he had to like really think about it for a while before he could come up with some solutions. It's not like a real time, access. It's got to kind of percolate in there. It's it's like a slow simmer. So that's one thing I've noticed about perspectives. The other thing is perspectives, if you have this perspectives learning style, it's very easy to be distracted. Your mind, it's almost like it's a fragile process sometimes because you have to really keep focus and your mind is in there doing what it's doing. And if you're distracted or if there's a lot of sensory input, if there's a lot, and we can explain that in another podcast, why it is, but this is what happens. You can get distracted, you can get off track, and it's hard to stay focused when you're using this process because it's a fragile process. So it takes some time. It's fragile. These are two things I've noticed with perspectives, and you might have some other things you've noticed as well. But those are two primary things I've noticed. If you're a perspectives person, that's not bad. That's normal for you. This is normal stuff. It's easy to be distracted, and it takes some time. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We've likened it. I remember the metaphor of the bloodhound on the trail in a maze.
Yeah.
If the bloodhound loses the scent, it might never be able to pick it back up. And when a perspectives person is working on a problem, that's kind of how it's working. Like, sometimes when they come up with a solution, they can't even tell you how they got there. They just let their mind go. And their mind just led them to the solution, which is pretty incredible. However, if they get distracted while they're working on that problem, or if they get, sort of thrown off course, they might never be able to pick up the trail again. So they tend to be very sensitive to distractions. You can see them do lots of things like sort of order their workroom or rearrange it in a way where their back is to a wall and they can see the door in order to see any distractions, entering. They'll unconsciously look for the place in like a restaurant where their back is to a wall. And they do this just because distractions are so jarring that they want to make sure that they can see them coming. And if you're a perspectives user, if what we're talking about, you're like, oh my gosh, I've never had anybody describe this the way I think so clearly. And you're not doing this, if your back is, like if you work in a cubicle and your back is to the opening of the cubicle, see if you can get it moved around. The quality of your work will improve by a significant percentage if you can just turn your back to a wall and watch the entrance. And it's not even like you're watching the entrance all the time. You just know that you're going to be able to see a distraction coming. And that part of the mental real estate that you're allocating to not being jarred by distractions can now be reallocated to the work that that you're working on. So it's actually a pretty high leverage hack for people who use perspectives. One thing I wanted to mention about perspectives before we move on to the second style of intuition is that perspectives is only used by 10% of the population. So, we said approximately 25, sometimes some statistics say as much as 30% of the population uses intuition as their primary learning style.
As more of us mate, it will go up higher, I think. So intuitives find each other and make babies.
And get it on. Yeah, entirely. Well, and you can see sort of like the rise of the creative class. You can really see intuitives coming out of the woodwork. And so, who knows what the actual real statistics are. Sure. But usually 25 to 30% is what gets bandied about. That said, of that 25 up to 30%, but it's probably closer to 25, only 10% are using perspectives. More are using the second form of intuition, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And my theory, I don't know this to be true, but I've been working with this information for a long time, so I've been coming up with a few theories. And my theory is that perspectives is one of the last of the cognitive functions to have evolved. I think it's new. I think it's new technology, which is why it feels really woo-woo.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like ESP, or it feels like mind reading or forecasting, or, telling the future. This was the mental process that the shamans of old tribes were using, all the way up to, like I said, some of the greatest sci-fi writers of all time were perspectives users. And so it feels like this incredible process that nobody quite understands. And I think it's because it's new. I think it's a new technology on the scene. I wouldn't be surprised if it had only evolved in the last, 15 to 20,000 years.
Yeah.
And so since that's the case, and when I say 15 to 20,000 years, that might not seem like that long ago, but some of the earlier mental processes probably evolved like 200,000 years ago, or even further back than that. So this is pretty new technology. And for those of you who use it, it's tough to find mentors. It's tough to find people who can train you to use this process. It's difficult to find other people who even get it and won't be weirded out, right? Like, you can even communicate with other people about it. So, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that it's funny you say that, because we actually have, just taking the profiles, like the tip of the iceberg, we actually have a full training program to teach people how to go through profiling, like learning all the system that we teach, and then not only learn it, but then be able to sit down with somebody and ask them questions and talk with them and determine their personality type and help them, coach them and all this stuff. So we've got lots of students that have gone through our really high level trainings, and we started a call for people that use this process once a month, that get together in a community to talk about it, because you're right, it is a hard place to find mentors for. And so these perspectives people come together and they get to talk about perspectives issues with each other and some of the challenges and some of the things they go through. And it's been a great, almost like support group for people that use this mental. It's kind of weird to say that, but it really is, because there's oftentimes, if you have this as a learning style, you probably have the experience of being misunderstood and just not understood on a regular basis, because you just think so differently than the rest of the world.
Perspectives people tend to have a lot of one-sided relationships.
Yeah.
Because they understand the other person way more than that person understands them. And so they have very unique needs and very unique challenges. And so the perspectives call that we set up in that community has, it's basically to go, okay, so what are the very unique needs that you want to talk about, this month? Because you can't find anybody else to talk about this with. And and it's something that I believe perspectives people are extremely powerful. I think they're a powerful force in the world. But because they don't get very much support, and because they don't really have a lot of people that understand how it works, it's difficult for them to rise up to become the best version of themselves, because they're just trying to get by. They're just trying to deal with these weird challenges that nobody else can even understand, much less give them advice on how to get to the next level. So I think they have a really unique time of it. And I also think that they're birds of paradise. They're amazing in their abilities. So if you are a perspectives user, then know that you're very special, and that there are at least two people on the planet who kind of get how you think. So the second style. Oh, did you want to say anything more?
No, I'm good. Let's go. Let's get into the extroverted intuition now.
Yeah. So the other style of intuition goes outward. And its technical name is extroverted intuition. However, the nickname that we've given it in the Genius system is exploration, because we feel that the word exploration really encapsulates how this process works. Now, Joel and I are both exploration users, and that's part of the reason why we're really attracted to each other, because we love we love that the other person can really understand us and get us, and that we enjoy doing the same activities. Now, unlike perspectives, which is an inward process, requires a lot of thought, is very
paced.
Yeah, like it's slow paced.
Yeah.
It's more exploratory inward. It's exploring the inner mind. Exploration, on the other hand, is more about exploring the world. It's about understanding patterns, not inside our heads, but actually patterns in the outside world. How do things work? Right? Like why is it that this thing works the way that it does? What if I push this button? What if I pull this switch, right? Like, what if I push this person? What would they do? And so exploration tends to be very test iterate. It tends to be very interactive. It's really about engagement, and it's very much about getting the world to reveal itself to you through your interaction with it. So exploration people have a couple of really cool things that they're able to do. The first one is that they're able to understand the connections and relationships to things that other people don't understand. They see how things are interrelated. Because they pushed a button over here one time, and then weirdly enough, 10 steps down the line, this thing responded and reacted. They start to understand how systems work, right? Like, oh, it's not just a matter of pushing this button and then this thing happens. It's a matter of pushing this button, and this thing happens, and then this thing over here happens, and then this thing responds to it, and then this emerges, right? It's really about understanding how the world around us is sort of functioning. One of the metaphors that I've tried to use to explain how our minds work is because it's
hopeless.
It's really kind of difficult, but it's kind of like a web, a spider's web. Now, every fly that flies into the spider's web, the spider knows the location of that fly. But the spider also knows the relationship between each of the flies that have flown into the web to each other. So it's not like I just know where fly A is. I know where fly A is in relationship to fly B and fly C. And that's how information comes at exploration people. It just kind of all flies into us, right? And we understand the relationship between this thing and this thing, even if it feels like it's totally not related. And so exploration people just get in the habit of thinking in that way. One of the exercises that I've heard another colleague of ours, Dario Nardi, try to explain how he knows when an exploration person is, he'll grab two objects off of a table, like a salt shaker and a package of salt, or no, excuse me, a salt shaker. I just said salt. A salt shaker and ketchup. Those two things are not usually related. Or maybe like a fork and a salt shaker.
Yeah.
And he'll look at the person and say, okay, these two things are married. Which one's the man and which one's the woman? Most people will take a moment to try to figure out what you're talking about, right? Like, why would you ask me? First of all, what do you mean they're married? And second of all, what do you mean which one's the man, which one's the woman? Like, why would these two things be married, and why would one be male and one be female? And then if you push, they go, well, I guess the fork is the female and the salt is the male, or whatever. They'll have some reason. You ask an exploration person that, they won't even blink. They'll instantly have an answer for you.
Absolutely.
And they won't even question why you ask them, because that seems like a totally reasonable question to them. Because that's how they see reality, right?
Yeah.
Well, of course the fork and the salt shaker are married. Of course one's a man and one's a woman. That's how it is, right?
Yeah.
And so exploration people just get in a habit of thinking in these interrelated, interconnected ways.
Yeah, and I mean, I would guess that a lot of exploration people have like 20 books going at one time of all sorts of different disciplines and different, areas of whatever. And oftentimes, like, for example, in my life, like, I'll be working on a business problem or something, and I'll be reading something about an art book or comedy, and I'll get an idea for business based on something I read in a comedy book, comedy writing book or something like this, because my mind is looking for my mind is constantly trying to make connections between things that actually don't have connections. That's basically what's going on. So I'm reading a comedy book and I'm like, what connections in here are related to, it's not even conscious, it's just happening as I'm reading. Oh, I see how they're doing this. I bet I could use that to write sales copy for our business over here because that's a humorous way of turning this phrase. And then you make this connection all of a sudden. It just, boom, it pops in your head because you're bringing in data from different places. And it's happening very rapidly oftentimes.
Yeah, it's really creative. I think the reason why we naturally want to make connections between two unrelated things is because that makes a brand new thing in the world.
Yeah.
Something the world has never seen if you can connect two objects that have never been connected before. So there's a real joy in the creative process.
If you've ever seen the television show House, Dr. House uses this mental process to learn information. He's an exploration person. That's his personality type. And you'll notice in the show, usually about after the third or fourth commercial break, about 10 to 12 minutes before the end of the show, he's got this big problem he's trying to solve. And they've tried everything. They've tried all the typical medical whatever. And he'll be sitting in his office, bouncing a ball against the wall, just racking his brain, trying to figure this out. And someone walks in and says something about his apartment, is going to be having to be cleaned because he's got termites or something. And because they said something about termites, it made him think about something else, which made him think about something else. And all of a sudden now he's got the answer to the problem. And you're like, if you don't use this process, you're like, how in the world did he make a connection between termites in his apartment to this cancer this person has? And now he knows the solution to solve it. But that's
Right.
how his brain's working, because he's getting these disparate pieces of information. He's making connections. And somehow that made a spark in his mind that said, aha, I've got the solution. And usually it's the right solution and the show ends on a happy note or whatever. but that's an example.
Frequently not happy.
or he solves the problem. Let's put it
Right.
that way. He's not a happy guy. But that's a typical example. If you watch this show, you'd see this play out usually in the show almost every single episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And so exploration has a tendency to be all about novelty. It loves new. It loves these new connections that could be made. It loves that if you mix termites and cancer, you come up with this whole new way to explain something or this whole new answer to a problem. And so novelty becomes the catchword for exploration people. And because they love novelty, they're usually very inventive and they're usually mavens. They are the first. They love to be the first. I've explained exploration to others as having a machete in your hand and there's 6 foot tall grass in front of you. And you have absolutely no fear about just entering that grass. Like you're just going to blaze a trail and cut it. And lions and tigers be damned. If you run into one, you'll figure it out when you get there. But you have to, there's a compulsion in you to chart new territory. So the people who were the first to come up with the idea of getting to the moon, right? They're like, no, let's go on the moon. Like we can do this. I know we can. And a great example of an exploration person is, a lot of the great scientists, not just sci-fi writers, but the great scientists have been exploration people. Albert Einstein uses exploration. Neil deGrasse Tyson is probably exploration. Bill Nye the Science Guy is definitely exploration. Richard Feynman was exploration user. So we see him over in the sciences. And then if you look at the world's great comedians.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Well, and this is something.
A lot of them are too.
It can look frenetic sometimes because it's so crazy. And Robin Williams is someone who uses this process. And if you ever watched his stand-up, he's all over the place. And he's making so many rapid connections in real time that you're like, I can't even you're like, I mean, I can follow him because I'm an introvert, but some people are like, where's he going with this? This is insane.
Yeah.
And it looks like insanity sometimes because it's so frenetic and so quick and so rapid, and those connections are just firing and firing, and it seems like it even gets faster the faster he goes.
Yeah. And so there's like exploration it's really about new connections. So to contrast these two then, and exploration, probably looking through the lens of evolution, it probably evolved before perspectives, but it was probably one of the last to evolve. But making those connections, you can see, becomes really important in trying to push humanity to the next level. Without the exploration process, humanity would stagnate. And that's why exploration is so fantastic. So if you look at these two intuitive processes, perspectives and exploration, they look quite different from each other. Exploration is very real-time kinetic. It's all about figuring things out right in the moment. It's very test iterate. It's very push the boundaries. It's willing to be obnoxious. It's willing to fail in order to get the answer it's looking for. Ultimately, exploration's asking what if. It's looking for the possibilities. It wants to know what if. Perspectives, on the other hand, is not real-time kinetic. It's post-processing. It's long timelines. It's digesting the information. It's seeing the implications. It's looking at it from all different perspectives. And it's not asking what if, it's asking why. So one person described the two, I thought, very, very beautifully. They said, if exploration is about thinking outside the box, perspectives is about thinking about the box.
Yeah. The other thing is, and if you remember from the last podcast, we talked about intuition being particularly interested in not necessarily the sensory data or the reliable data. It's interested in speed of information and depth of insight. And both types of intuition do this. However, it seems like exploration likes the speed of information and perspectives likes the depth of insight of that information. So you tend to see a little bit of polarization there between those two. Now, both like both of those things, but typically I think perspectives goes toward more of the depth, and I think exploration goes more towards the speed.
Definitely. They're very compatible, by the way. When you marry these two styles of intuition together, that's usually when you get some of the greatest business partnerships ever. You get really great marriages. You get really great partnerships in general. Now, that doesn't mean if you're one style of intuition, you have to be looking for somebody of the other style. You can be very happy, very successful, etc. with somebody of your own style, or even somebody who's not intuitive. However, when you get the two together, they're a very powerful, they're a power pair. They're a powerful combination. So one of the great things about understanding these two styles of intuition is recognizing, number one, that you're not alone, right? Like the reason we're able to break down these two styles is because you're one of a series of people who share this process, right? It's something that's been able to be observable to a point where we can describe them, and we might be describing you in sort of an eerily accurate way. And it's because you're part of a group of people who think like that. You're not alone. So that's first and foremost. You are not broken. There's nothing wrong with you. You actually are a part of a small group of people that think in a very radically different way, but that the world needs, right? The world needs both styles of intuition. You could see why both of them would be very, very important for getting us to the next level. Without these styles of intuition, we would absolutely stagnate.
And when you realize this about yourself, we've actually called it an awakening, an intuitive awakening, where you are realizing, oh, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not just a weirdo. This is actually how my brain is hardwired. And you awaken to this knowledge. You have this intuitive awakening of, wow, people actually have language for this. They have tools and processes that I can use to develop my intuition even further, embrace it, find like minds, and continue forward in my development based on this new information. What an amazing feeling that is, because I've gone through it, having this awakening experience.
Yeah. Well, and on top of that, the world really needs you to be showing up as an intuitive.
Absolutely.
Because there's not that many. 1 in 4 that feels like a significant percentage of the population. But just like we talked about last time, 1 in 4 people are left-handed. And if you're a right-hander, do you ever think about left-handed people ever?
I don't.
I don't.
Sorry, left-handers.
I know. And it's not like I think that they should be marginalized or killed or anything like people have sometimes thought in the past. They're sinister, left-handed people. It's not that they're wrong or anything. I just don't think about them. They're not part of my daily experience. And that's how the world thinks about intuitives, right? Until intuitives rise up, until they take a position of leadership, and then all of a sudden they're shooting stars. Name a lot of the major leaders of the world, and they're using a different style of intuition.
I've noticed that people actually like intuition, but they don't like it with them. Like, if you're an intuitive and you're around people who use a different style, a sensory learning style, they might get annoyed, like the person I was talking to at the very beginning of the podcast, where I can't just be normal. But probably that same person that thinks I'm a weirdo goes home at the evening after work and watches television program after television program with the main character
being intuitive
as an intuitive learning style. And they love it because he's, like the different shows that are using this process to figure problems out or to solve mysteries or to solve medical mysteries or whatever. They're using intuition to do that, and people love watching that. But once you're in a real daily life experience, now the stuff's getting really real, and it's really present with them, and it's like, I don't know if I want this person that weird around me. I just like them on TV. Get them away from me.
Right. So there's a really weird message that gets sent to intuitives that, you might really connect with somebody on a program or a fantastic character in a book that, or a movie or whatever, that you think, man, I think just like this person. Why am I the pariah? And yeah, it's a really confused message that gets sent to intuitives that we love you in fiction, but we hate you in reality. Or not hate you, but just don't really, we don't really appreciate you in reality. The truth is, though, start naming some of the major movers and shakers in the world. Oprah Winfrey, Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. Some of the major, movers and shakers in Hollywood, and
President Obama,
right? Like, there's a lot of people on the planet who are in massively powerful positions who alter how we think, who are all intuitives, that gave themselves permission to be intuitive. That's all they did. All they did was give themselves permission to completely step into their greatest strengths and their greatest genius. And that's really the message we want to give to intuitives. I know there's probably been some mixed messages sent to you. I know you probably kind of maybe felt like odd man out sometimes, maybe growing up, maybe in the family you were raised in. The truth is, though, the more you step into permission, first of all, giving yourself permission to be intuitive, and then figuring out skills and tools to make that intuition more powerful and strong, and then finding a way that you can make a big impact in the world, you could be truly unstoppable. You could do amazing things for the world. So we really would love for you to feel awakened. We would love for you to feel like you have permission to be yourself.
We've actually created a program around just this, and if you're interested in going down this road, it's obviously a great leverage point and a tool for you to use to be able to awaken your intuition, to be able to see how to use it, how to meet other people that are like-minded. And I'd just like to throw it out that's available on our website, personalityhacker.com, as it's actually called Intuitive Awakening. It's a program that deals specifically with this learning style. If you have it, and obviously you need to know if you're intuitive or not. So come over and take the assessment, take the test to find out if you are either perspectives or exploration. Mm-hmm. And if you're one of those, that means you're an intuitive. You learn through this process, and we want to be here for your journey. We're real excited to have you as a listener, and we want to stay in touch and keep going down this road with you together.
Yeah, and we'll continue on this series with intuition, talking a little bit about some of the things that intuitives deal with, some of the unique challenges that intuitives deal with, and maybe some tools on how to, get through those challenges. And the Intuitive Awakening program will be putting on a brand new one towards the end of the month. So keep your eye open for information on the brand new version, because we actually did an Intuitive Awakening program a couple of years ago, but we're going to be totally revamping it. So keep your eyes peeled for a little bit more information on that. But in the meantime, please feel free to go to the website and take the free version of the Genius Style Assessment and find out if you are a perspectives or an exploration user.
So that's personalityhacker.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/personalityhacker, twitter.com/personalityhack. And please subscribe to this podcast, tell your friends about it, and we'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you're thinking, if you have any questions and all that. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We will talk to you next time.